I want to talk a bit about the Melbourne Press Club's Young Journalist of the Year. The Young Journalist of the Year award was the Melbourne Press Club's first award for excellence. It was started 30 years ago by the then president, Jim Clark, who at the time I think was editing Qantas magazine, and he managed to snaffle a return airfare to somewhere from Qantas as a prize. So then the issue became, where do we send them? And he asked my advice. I was editor of The Age at the time, and I'd been attending a fantastic annual conference in the United States called the Investigative Reporters and Editors Conference, which I was in no doubt was the best journalism conference in the world, and probably still is. It started off as a project in Arizona when an investigative reporter was in his car when it was blown up by the local mafia, and he was killed. His name was Dan Bolles. Now the mafia in casino country in America, it makes Carl Williams look like a boy in a sandpit. But the reaction to that death of an investigative reporter was that dozens of reporters from all over the country swarmed on Arizona and did over the mafia. They ended up with a series of about 40 articles that was published in 23 newspapers, and it led to law changes and put on notice the local judges and prosecutors and casino operators and crooks that people were watching. And that became the sort of spirit of this new organisation called the Investigative Reporters and Editors Group. And the first one I went to was their 10th anniversary one, which was held in Arizona. And they were studying things like computer-assisted reporting, which meant nothing to me. You know, this was years before we had PCs or even email addresses. But I thought, I've got to get some reporters over here to listen to these guys, because they came together once a year and actually shared information, helped each other, told each other how to get stories. And I'd never seen this in the culture of Australian journalism, at least. And the first person I sent over there was David Wilson, who was then heading up the Insight team. And a few years later, he had a fantastic database, the first computerised database, I think, in Australian journalism, that just put together all the public record stuff of individuals, whether it be convictions in courts, transcripts, Royal Commission tapes, bankruptcies, defaults, loan defaults, any negative mention of crooks. And that enabled David and his team to consistently publish names and photographs on the front page and call them crooks, because even if they did sue, there was evidence there of no reputation worth paying for. The United States, I think, for the last 20 or 30 years has been a little bit ahead of us in all kinds of things, and I think one of the things we can take comfort from is that in the United States they're now getting some good signs of online revenue, not just from advertising, but also subscriptions. Let's hope that comes here. Anyway, for the last 30 years, our Young Journalist of the Year has gone to the IRE conference, and this year, Aisha Dow went to the IRE conference in Texas. Aisha was from the Border Mail in Albury, and she did some fantastic work which won her the award, including a sustained investigation into the abuse of prescription drugs and doctor shopping on the border. So I'd like to ask Aisha to come up just for a few minutes and tell us about her experience at the IRE and the United States. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that introduction. It's a very rare occasion that an Australian journalist gets to see 1,200 reporters in one place, let alone the more endangered investigative kind. But that was the amazing experience I had only a couple of weeks ago when I attended the IRE conference in San Antonio in Texas. This opportunity is a special prize given every year to a lucky young journalist, and I would like to take the opportunity to again thank the Melbourne Press Club and sponsors Josephine Nichols and the Wilnick Family Trust, who fund the award in honour of David Wilson. The 4-day conference was in many ways exactly what you'd expect of a gathering of hundreds of journalists. The bar was always packed late into the night, and the line at Starbucks was always long in the morning, even though I quickly discovered the coffee over there is absolutely foul. The sessions I enjoyed the most at the conference were the ones where people talked about the interesting stories they had spent time working on. ESPN has done an impressive investigation into brain damage suffered by NFL players who sustained repeated concussions on the football field. There's been a number of cases where ex-players have developed early onset dementia, and the issue hasn't been very well handled by the league. The ESPN journalist who spoke at the conference said the NFL even went to the extent of taking action to prevent an ex-player who had developed dementia and died from donating his brain to science. The journalist said the saga could be compared with the poor treatment of war veterans, and he also made links to previous views on smoking or arguments around smoking. And this is a bit of a fun one and a bit of a simple one, really, from the world of broadcast. An investigative report by the American ABC who looked into a spate of thefts by TSA officers. They're the people who scan your bags at the airport. The network had all the data they needed for this story, but they lacked the vision. So what the producer did was she deliberately left her iPad behind at security checkpoints to see if anyone would take the bait and steal it. On the sixth occasion in Orlando, it went missing. Beforehand, they had downloaded an app called the Find My Phone app, which anyone can have if they lose their phone. They can log on and use a GPS tracker to find it afterwards. Sure enough, afterwards they log on and they found the misplaced iPad speeding along the highway to a home of a TSA officer. They gave the guy a few weeks to return it before they went in and busted him. The Find My Phone app has a function where you can press an alarm that sounds on the lost device. So there was this funny moment where the host was out the front of this guy's house and he's saying, "No, I didn't steal it." And you can hear the beeping coming from inside the house. He actually blamed his wife, which was a bit rich, I thought. But for the most impressive speech of the week, you had to wait for the very last day, the keynote address by Mexican journalist Marceli Turrete, and I probably just massacred that name, so I apologise to Marceli. Marceli told us that in Mexico, investigative journalism has been completely silenced by the brutal drug cartels that terrorise the country. She told us that in the past 10 years, 72 journalists have been killed and at least another 17 have disappeared. One of those was her colleague, Regina Martinez, who a year ago was strangled in her own home. Her murder wasn't solved, nor the other 71 killings. In some areas, she told us, journalists who publish information that annoys a certain group are abducted and tortured, and their skin marked to show that they won't get a second chance. Some newsrooms have been burnt down while reporters were inside writing. One of the most disturbing parts of her speech was the knowledge that many of the most violent areas of Mexico are just a few hours away from where we were tucking into our lemon tarts and Caesar salads in San Antonio. For months, in a state that borders Texas, passengers of public buses have been made to get off, and in that very place, recruited by force, taken as slaves, or killed and buried. Only suitcases arrive at the bus terminals. It was a sobering picture she painted, and unfortunately, I probably can't do it justice in my speech, but there is a link to the full transcript, and I'll put that on my Twitter account if anyone wants to have a look afterwards. Finally, on a lighter note, I've got one last IRE highlight for you. On the final day, they handed out the Golden Padlock Award, which, unlike a quill or a gold Walkley, is not something you want on your mantelpiece. The honour acknowledges the dedication of government officials who work hard to keep vital information from the public. Maybe something we should have here, perhaps. The winner was the US Border Patrol, who won for its refusal to name the agents involved in fatal shootings. But my favourite finalist was New Jersey Transit, America's largest state-operated transit agency, who were asked for their hurricane preparedness plan in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy. What did they produce? They produced a document entirely blacked out except for the title. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aisha. I remember when we chose Aisha as the winner this year, we put in the citation that this was an eye-catching portfolio for major media recruiters. This young girl from Albury. A few weeks later, she was hired by The Age and is now on the City Beat doing good stuff. We don't pick many duds in the Young Journalist of the Year award. Among the other winners over the years have been people like Nick McKenzie and Gerard Waitley and a host of others.